Hi everyone, my name is Adoma Champong. I'm the program manager here at NIA Center for the Arts. If you don't know, NIA Center for the Arts is a art service organization that supports, promotes, and showcases an appreciation for the arts from across the African diaspora. That looks like everything from this session this evening to Pew for Too Long, to artist residencies, exhibitions, showcase, special events, and everything under the sun. I'm really happy to be here with these four incredible panelists to talk about the nature of creative industry and advertising, particularly in their roles, how they got to where they are, and their outlook for the future. So without further ado, I'll begin with having Denise introduce herself, and then we'll move on to Anton, we'll move on to Mirabelle, and then we'll move on to Damian next. So Denise, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself for the folks watching at home and also for the folks on the panel as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Denise Cole. I'm a creative director and co-founder of the agency Juliet.
Amazing. And then next we'll move on to Anton. If you could introduce yourself for the folks watching at home, if people can follow you online, where they can do so, and tell us about yourself, fill in those blanks for us.
Yeah. Hey guys, my name is Anton Mwewa, and I'm an art director at Cassette. And my Instagram handle is way too complicated to say out loud, so maybe we can edit it into the bottom at some point. But yeah, you can follow me there if you really want to.
Amazing. Thanks, Anton. And next we have Damian. Can you introduce yourself for the folks watching at home?
Hi, everyone. Damian, a designer at Juliet. Feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty much off the grid everywhere else, so there you are.
Nice. Exciting. I'm excited to talk about, the fact that you are off the grid, but, you also work in advertising. I wonder how that works out. And then last but not least, Mirabelle, can you introduce yourself for the folks watching at home as well?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mirabelle. Mirabelle Eze. I'm a copywriter at Cassette. And I guess, yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn as well. Just my first name and last name.
Nice. And all of this information will be down below in some sort of description box wherever we upload this. So Mirabelle, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your role as a copywriter? What does your day-to-day look like, and how does your role as a copywriter support like the entire ecosystem of advertising?
What's my role as a copywriter? Well, I think, let me define what a copywriter is. If you see whatever ad you see, whether it's a radio spot or like a TV spot or a video, the words in those ads are the responsibility of a copywriter. So that's one way to understand what copywriting is.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much what I do. So whether it's, I don't know, a video spot, radio spot, an email, whatever it is, I work on the breadth of all of those things at Cassette. And my day-to-day is, getting briefed on a new project, getting feedback on a project that I've been working on, going in meetings with creative directors to get feedback and just keep the projects that I'm on going. And I also, something that I do on my day-to-day when I have extra time is to just think of like extra ideas that I could pitch to creative directors. So that's a big part of my day-to-day. And yeah, I think we'll get into like what I really do later on, but that's the top level of it.
Very high level. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll move on to Damian. If you could tell us a little bit about, what you do as a designer. I think that word it can be so general. And I think for folks watching at home, they might be curious, what exactly does a designer do? What do you design? And then how does your role as a designer fit into the entire ecosystem of, advertising and creative industries?
Yeah, so I would classify myself as a graphic designer. Part of my day-to-day, or most of my day-to-day, would be sort of developing layouts, assets to support, art directors, creative directors, copywriters. A good part of my day as well is sort of researching, sketching, just to build sort of, a toolkit to sort of help me help, copywriters, art directors, and everyone at the agency.
Nice. So this toolkit is something where, let's say someone approaches you with a question or a design challenge or problem, you can just kind of refer to these things that you've developed, on not your spare time, but you've got kind of in the back seat that you can be like, okay, cool, I've been working on this. This might work for the design problem you have, or is that like a little bit different?
Yeah, it's pretty much that, oftentimes we need to think about how are we going to make a out of home campaign come to life.
Mhm.
And, I will sort of build the mock-up, build these sort of colors, the typefaces, certain elements that could sort of help the copywriter and art director sort of flow in their ideas.
Nice. So one thing that this is the second of the Too Few for Too Long panel that we're doing. One thing that came up in the last one was this notion of jargon. I feel like oftentimes some jargon is going to be coming up in our conversation here. And so for the folks who are watching at home, and even sometimes for me, what do you mean by out of home? Like what does that entail?
It would be like a billboard that you would see outside, or even a sort of inside the ball shelter, you would see a poster. Anything like that would be considered out of home media.
Awesome. But Antoinette, please tell us a little bit about your role as an art director, and again, how you support the ecology of advertising.
Yeah, so Mirabelle laid a really good groundwork. She's a copywriter, and I work with a copywriter. So the copywriter is in charge of the words, technically, and the art director is in charge of the visuals, technically. So that's where this notion of the confusion between a designer and an art director kind of comes in, because we're both visual people. But an art director would be working with a copywriter, and we come up with a lot of the concepts for, particularly for ads. If you, I don't know, you see like, a really clever ad somewhere and you're like, wow, that's smart. It's usually like the art director copywriter team who came up with that little idea. And then the people around us kind of help us build it into what it ends up becoming.
Nice.
So, yeah, I hope that does a good job explaining.
I think it's pretty clear. And one thing that actually came up in the session, that we did before was like, we were kind of using the notion of like step 1, step 2, step 3. And so if, let's say, the client approaching a creative agency is like step 1, Anton, where would you say you fall in? So like, let's say if this is a 5-step process, from step 1, you've got a client, step 5, something that's now on a billboard. Where would you say that you fall in?
I would say that's like step maybe 3 or 4. I mean, this goes into like the inner workings of the agency. Like sometimes, there's a strategy team, for example, and the strategy team will write a brief about which is essentially the messaging that we're going to try to, execute in this ad. And then, there's the account team. There's so much behind the scenes stuff, but eventually that brief comes to us and the creative team, which is the art director and the copywriter. And then that's where the creativity, quote unquote, like the visual creativity kind of kicks off, which is not to say of people in the back, like the strategy team is also extremely creative in the way they, because they craft the messaging in a lot of ways. So I guess we would be like step 3 or 4, and that's still very early in the process too, because if you break it down to steps, it feels like there's multiple steps, really.
Yeah, maybe 5 steps is actually a little bit too limiting. There's more like like 15, step 20.
Yeah, probably like 15. Yeah, that's accurate.
Nice. And last but certainly not least, Denise, please tell us a little bit about your role as a creative director. What does your day-to-day look like, and how do you support like this ecosystem of advertising?
Right. Yeah. So as a creative director, my role is really to guide and help shape the work that comes out of the agency, and to give guidance to the creative teams. And so, in becoming a creative director, like an advertising creative director, you were either once a copywriter or once an art director. For me, my background is in art direction, but it's important as a creative director to have an understanding, like a strong understanding of both sides of that coin, as well as design, because you are required to give guidance around all of that. So as I think a few of these guys have mentioned, over the course of the day, there is a lot of back and forth with the creative teams in terms of giving feedback, guidance, and thoughts of how to take what might be the nugget of an idea and really shape it into the best possible version of itself.
Awesome. And so I'm curious to know, what are some skills that you use that like you're able to leverage to be successful in your role? And I'll, begin with you, Denise. Soft skills, hard skills. One thing that came up in the previous conversation was just like a lot of interpersonal skills that like some folks may not realize is critical to your role, or, any given role, to be honest. So what are some soft skills that you're able to leverage to be successful, but also those like hard skills that you've just had to pick up along the way?
Yeah, it's a great question, for sure. There's a lot of, technical skill that's involved in getting to the role of creative director in terms of the talents you hone and as a art director first, just having a strong visual eye, all of that. But really in terms of dealing with people, situations on a day-to-day, there's a great deal of empathy that I think is involved in doing it well.
Yep.
You're interacting with a lot of different folks who have a lot of different concerns, and that's not only from inside the agency, but also the clients that you're speaking with, who you're helping to bring their brand to life as well. So just having that kind of empathy and understanding of what it is that each person who has a part to play in it is trying to achieve is key, for sure.
And so it just seems like as a creative director, you work a lot with people, like as much as I think some of this might seem like it's in your head and you're juggling all these amazing ideas and concepts, a lot of the day-to-day seems to be a lot of like interfacing with folks from different branches, different roles, and just like that can be pretty difficult. So, being able to do that effectively sounds like a big part of what you do.
Definitely.
Awesome. Mirabelle, I'll pose that same question to you. What are some soft and hard skills that you're able to leverage to be a successful copywriter? And how did you acquire these skills as well? Were the vocational programs that you went to, art programs, mentors, areas like that where you're able to pick up your skills?
Yeah, I think for a copywriter, storytelling is really important. It's an important skill to have. And like Denise says, it could be a talent that you have and you hone along the journey, like along your way. So I think that's important. And then in terms of technical abilities, I think being able, like having a good command of, I guess, the English language, if you live in Canada, like just knowing how to like actually write would then help you tell your stories better to your audience. So I think those are the skills in terms of like the programs that I had to be part of to get to where I am today. I think there's a plethora of them. There's a lot of them because the journey has been long to get to where I am right now. And in terms of mentors, one of them is right here on this call with us. Denise has been one of my biggest mentors, like since I got into Miami advertising school. And it's really just been a very incredible journey, like having her guide me all through like all the different steps of my career, literally all of them. So it's been really awesome. In terms of my programs, I studied at U of T and then I went to Miami Ad School. Maybe we'll get into that like later, but those are pretty much what I've done to get to where I am today.
Amazing. Shout out to you, Denise. Thanks for being such a great mentor.
You're too sweet. You're giving me too much credit.
No, seriously, no.
You did this.
It's true.
It's true. Damian, what about you? What are some skills that you're able to leverage to be a successful designer? Whether they're, again, those soft skills like working with people, interpersonal skills, or like very hard practical skills that you can pick up, let's say in school or through mentors or, programs like that.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's a lot of different small things. It's definitely, refining your eye. It's definitely sort of time management, patience. You have to go through tens and hundreds of, very small revisions, and you have to have that sort of patience and sort of empathy, with the people that you're working with. In terms of sort of hard skills, going to OCAD, studying advertising, you get the full sort of range, learned how to, deal with typography, how to deal with colors, how to lay things out, how to deal with, information that I might get from a copywriter, or an idea that I might get from an art director. How can I bring that to life using illustrations or fonts or colors and things of that nature?
And so when you talk about refining your eye, I think this is something that I also heard from you, Denise. Can you break that down for us? It can also, I'm sure it's not an easy thing to break down, like refining your eye, but if you could, describe what that looks like and how to know that your eye is something that you can train and to refine, and what are some ways that you can actually do that? What is it like in terms of consuming content or programs, or just producing until you've refined it to a level that you feel comfortable at? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's almost like, how you would treat food. It's sort of what you take in from a culture perspective. What are you watching? What news are you, reading, listening to? What are you surrounded by? I feel like if you are surrounded by a very specific thing, your work might end up producing only that. But if you can diversify your environment, whether it's from the people that are physically around you, to just like podcasts, music, stuff like that, that helps you refine your eye or take a step back and make correct decisions about certain things.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I feel like sometimes we can hear things like, train your eye, refine your eye. But I think for some folks watching at home, it might be like this huge question mark. How do I do that? And so, yeah, it's really great to hear, your perspective on this refining process. And Anton, can you tell us about, the skills that you have that you're able to leverage, again, soft skills, hard skills, and where you may have picked them up to be, successful in what you do on the day-to-day, but also, where you might have picked those skills up as well?
Yeah. I find a lot of I was kind of always, and I feel this is true of many people who work in the arts or in advertising in particular, kind of always were a little creative in some ways. Yeah. So you kind of take that and build on it. And to the point, like I found it interesting, this conversation about like refining eyes, for example. I think most people who are already considering some kind of artistic career already have some kind of eye, because there's people who, are very, it's the right brain is scientific. We're very like, logical and scientific and like kind of thought process, who may kind of never even attempt to like refine their eye or even think that they have one, and it just like lies dormant, you know what I mean? And they're strong in other ways. And I feel like all of us in the arts kind of have this innate ability.
And so you mentioned that you were always a little bit creative. I want to talk about like the pathways that you folks have, gone on, the journeys that you've gone on to arrive at the roles that you're in today. So I'm sure it's a long story for many of us, but if you could let us know some of the key moments in your journey, whether it's identifying that this is an industry you wanted to move into, earlier years in high school, post-secondary, kind of wherever, just to get a sense of like what your journey looks like. And what we're hoping to illustrate is that I believe once we share all of our journeys, or your journeys, that you'll see that they're pretty unique, and no two journeys are the same. And if they are, perhaps there are challenges that one person experienced that they didn't. So Anton, if you could share what your journey looked like in arriving in your role, in any kind of way that you think best expresses what it took for you to get here.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Zambia, and both my parents were very not artistically inclined. It was very old school, so there was a focus on academics and stuff. But then like later in high school, I kind of got advertising in my head as an idea, but I didn't know how to actually do anything about it. It was very much like, someone has to make ads, right? Like someone's probably getting paid somewhere to do this, so I feel like I should be doing this. But I kind of didn't explore that because I was interested in journalism as well and writing. So when I moved to Canada, I studied journalism, and I thought that would kind of, after doing that for a while, I thought maybe now's the time to explore this advertising thing, because now that I have journalism, I can kind of come back to it if I need to. And I thought I was going to be a copywriter, but I always had this kind of visual side to me that I really enjoyed, and I realized that I enjoyed that more than writing. So I looked up ad schools in Canada, and OCAD came up, and ended up going to OCAD. And now I'm here.
Nice.
So it was kind of a seed of an idea that kind of didn't go anywhere at first, and then ended up where I initially wanted to end up, which kind of good, I guess.
Would you say that going to OCAD was critical in you, existing in your role as an art director today? Is that something that was like pivotal for you, or like a catalyst in entering into your role? I'm going to ask because a lot of folks are contemplating post-secondary education, and if it's right for them, if it's something that they need to get into the spaces that they want to get into, particularly for advertising. Do you feel like going to OCAD was something that was supportive to you in your career?
100% yes. I do think you don't need to have a post-secondary education advertising because it's a creative field. So if you can develop that skill by yourself and create a portfolio, sorry, my dog keeps walking up to me, and create a portfolio just by yourself. And if you have the skills, great. But I found OCAD and generally post-secondary education is really helpful because you do cover a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily even think are part of advertising, because we covered, like I mentioned, strategy earlier. We covered research, strategy, writing, all these different little elements. And then you kind of, while you're there, you find what you really want to do, and then you hone in on that. So yeah, I would say post-secondary education is really helpful.
Nice. And Damian, you also mentioned that you went to OCAD as well. Can you talk about your journey in arriving as a designer, again, whether it might be from early years in high school or just kind of like beginning at OCAD, but show us or tell us a little bit about your journey in arriving in your role as a designer.
Sure. So I guess I could start with my parents. My mom was a programmer, so she was building, like files for ergonomic furniture and chairs and stuff like that. So I always saw her sketching files and stuff like that in the background. My father was a contractor, so I saw him always, developing building plans and site plans and stuff like that. So I always had an affinity for sort of drawing and painting. So that followed me all the way from childhood to sort of high school, where I knew I wanted to sort of pursue something that had to deal with illustration or drawing and painting. So I found the sort of illustration program at OCAD, and that's where I started my sort of career journey. But it took me a year and a half in the program to realize that, I actually wanted a little bit more. I didn't think I was good or capable enough to do graphic design, but there was something interesting about advertising, how that program in and of itself at OCAD just taught you any and everything about, the stuff that I loved, drawing, all the way up to, building ideas, working with people, stuff of that nature. So that's where I transitioned to advertising to then realize, I guess, 3 years in, that my strong suit was, graphic design, using a bit of my, drawing or painting skills and sort of weaving that into, help advertising ideas.
Nice. Were there any challenges that you experienced in your way to becoming a designer, bumps in the road, or perhaps there's things that you're still facing in terms of challenges that you're working to overcome as part of your, ever-long journey?
I think the biggest thing was just that believing somehow in my head that I wouldn't be good enough as a graphic designer. So sort of testing these sort of different avenues of illustration and advertising, but then, landing into graphic design and realizing that, hey, I can still maintain those things that I love from, both of those worlds, and weave it in here.
Nice. Is that something that you would say that you still face in kind of like reaffirming your confidence and your skills? And I'm asking for folks at home who might be somewhere that they're happy, but confidence is something that might come up in kind of affirming that I deserve to be here. My work is of quality. I'm good at what I do. Is it a challenge that you've already faced or that you're currently facing? And if you have come over that, do you have any tips for folks watching at home?
I would say it's still like baby steps, but I think that is the beauty of our industry, of that sometimes you have to sort of, I guess, fail a bit or question yourself, but it's you know, along the way, you have people like Denise or mentors or teachers that show you, you know, keep doing what you're doing because it could turn out to be this. So definitely more confident now, but it's still something that, you know, is with me.
Yeah, I'm sure folks at home will be, you know, appreciative to know that's something that you struggle with, but that they might be struggling with as well. And Mirabelle, can you talk about, you know, your journey as well? I know you touched on it a little bit when you spoke about your role as a copywriter and also a little bit about yourself, but how did you arrive at, you know, where you are now? I know you went to school and, you know, you've been connected with Denise, but talk about your journey, you know, what it looked like for you when you decided that this is something that was, you wanted to pursue, and also any challenges that you might have experienced or are currently experiencing.
Yeah, sure. So my journey started, well, I guess my background is my dad was a writer as well. He was a journalist back in Nigeria and a speechwriter. And I'd always known that I had some sort of, I guess, skill in writing, but I'd always parked it away as that's not something I could do for a living. Like if you're not like an actual author of a book, then you know, I never really thought that you could make a living writing every single day. And so I parked that away. And my first choice, knowing that I did want to do something creative for a living, my first choice was architecture for the longest time. And so fast forward to moving to Canada, I you know, studied, well, I got into the program at U of T, but quickly realized that it was way too theoretical than creative. And so that fell through. And so my backup plan was this digital communications program at U of T. And so I transferred to that program. And I did writing as well as my minor. Again, never really thinking that writing would be a thing. And I discovered copywriting on a website that the school had, where they'd, you know, talk about like all the possible career paths that you could take in this program. And I was like, I don't know what copywriting, because I saw copywriting and what I thought of was trademarks and law, like, you know, that sort of copywriting.
Let's go think about that.
Yeah. So, and I never really, well, I parked that away again. And eventually I got a job at a design agency where I did part account coordination and social media management. I did not like the account coordination part, but the social media part, I got to write copy on their social and I got to ideate on creating content. And that sparked my love for, you know, creativity again. And so I looked into advertising and I was like, you know what, I have to do this. Like it just has to happen. And so I found Miami Ad School and I applied and I got it. Now to the challenges of advertising. You know, what's interesting is that I'd always known of advertising agencies, but I never really, I would go on their websites and I never really saw anyone that looked like me. So in my head, I would always think that it's not for me. Like, you know, yes, I want to be a creative, but it's not really for me. And Denise, I'm going to bring you up again. But so fast forward to my first class at Miami Ad School. I walked into this class and it was being taught by Denise. And literally, I felt like that was a sign that, you know, this was for me. And so, and since then, it's just been really, really, you know, it's taking a lot of hard work, but just having all the mentors that I had at the school was really, really helpful. And yeah, here I am today. So.
Right. I would say that you're lucky in that, you know, the first class that you walked into was being taught by not only Denise, but, you know, a Black woman. Do you think that if, you know, that first class, or maybe like the first few classes, or if not all of them that you took, you didn't see yourself? Do you feel like your experience might have been different in, you know, understanding that this is something that you wanted to continue to pursue?
I think it would have been. I think it would have been much more of a struggle. I'm glad it happened the way that it did, because I don't want to imagine it not happening that way. But I think one thing is really just finding those mentors or reaching out to people who you think look like you or who are succeeding. Because one thing that really stood out to me was Denise was a co-founder of, like, you know, an agency, and that really like inspired me, not just to get into the industry, but knowing that there's a future in the industry for me, not just as a Black woman, but like just as a person, you know. And so having her there was really, 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 honestly, like, it was a game changer for me. So, and that's why I think it's important to do sessions like this, so that other people can see people who look like them, who, and, you know, being in this industry, and maybe that is some sort of inspiration for them. And so I think that's the psychology of representation is really important.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think we often hear representation matters, and it can almost feel like, it's overly repetitive at this point. We hear it all the time, but sometimes we need stories like yours to reaffirm that it really is important, and it often can change lives, representation. And so I'm so glad that you shared that for me, but also for the viewers watching at home. Denise, obviously this is quite the story, and I don't know if you knew that Mirabelle would share this, but I'm curious about your experience as a Black woman working in advertising, working in creative industries. Obviously, your presence in the industry has changed, many people's lives, but it might not have been the same for you. You might have had certain challenges that other folks don't face, or certain opportunities that other folks don't have. But I'm curious what your experience is like, just in general, being Black in advertising, but also being a Black woman in advertising as well.
First of all, I want to say that it's so meaningful to me, Mirabelle, that that was your experience walking into the class. That honestly means a lot to me. So thank you for that. I will say, in terms of coming up in the industry, I started my career in advertising actually in San Francisco. And I was actually quite fortunate in the agency that I first had my first job in advertising in, that there were a lot, a number of Black people who were employed there. And that was meaningful to me at the time, but became way more meaningful when I moved away from that location and that job, back to Toronto, and seeing how little representation there actually was here in a city that's meant to be so diverse, that it feels quite strange. And I would say, even in walking around on the streets in San Francisco, you would you would think you came across less Black people, and yet in this agency that I was in, there were a number of people within the creative department. And even, again, it's the power of that first face that you see when you walk through the door. But even the receptionist, when I walked through the door for the interview on that first day, was a Black woman who was so incredibly welcoming and happy to see me there. That had an effect on me, and I still recall walking in the doors that first day. So yeah, it does matter, it does change your perspective on how welcome you are to be in a space when you see other people there. And I think there is a joint excitement,
Definitely,
when you find that you're not alone.
Yeah. So, obviously you've touched a few people, if not all, I would say, on this panel. What are some ways that you've been able to do that? We often hear people talk about opening doors for people, creating opportunities, or just showing up to, be that representation that, impacts someone's future. What are some ways that you've been able to do that, or that you're currently doing it, to make sure that it's no longer too few for too long, and we're actually beginning to see more Black folks, working in these roles as designers, copywriters, art directors, etc.?
Yeah. It's such the ability to show up for somebody and have that effect, I think is demonstrated here. Is just it's not even that there's not that much that needs to be done beyond being there and being open to the people who are coming to you and wanting to learn and wanting to know more about what this industry is. It's actually such a simple thing, and I am, because for me, I feel like I haven't done anything. I've just been here. That's it. But I do recognize that seeing people there matters tremendously.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for being there, I should say. Thanks for just being there, because I'm sure you make it sound easy, but I'm sure it's not often always easy. So appreciate that. And
No,
for
I
you,
think,
Damian, oh, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, finish up. You were saying something.
No, I was just gonna say that I think there are so many, I shouldn't say so many. I think there are, Black people in this industry that are so happy to see that slowly those numbers are changing, and see more and more people finding their way into this industry. That everyone who I've met who fits that category wants to do what they can to help other people find their way here. If it's something that can be fulfilling for people, and if it's something that can monetize the passion that they have for the arts, I think there is a tremendous amount of excitement to bring more people into the fold.
Definitely. And so for Damian, what is it like, for you being a designer and being Black in this role, but also in just all the, again, intersectionalities that make up who you are? Have you experienced challenges? Have you experienced, opportunities? And, what does it look like for you in working in this industry? What does it mean like for you? And if you can talk to us about what your experience looks like, not only in a day-to-day, but also like as a long-term, what does it look like? And, what does it mean for you to be, Black and in advertising?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing, but a little bit, I guess it's also like bittersweet that there's not enough of us. But I think again, my experience has been, enriched with, people that look like me and, people of color. My first sort of internship was at a boutique design studio in Toronto. I think there was 6 people, but, it was a principal or a co-founder was an Asian man. So, while he wasn't Black, he really did support me in my early steps to, bolster my confidence, being who I am without having to sort of compromise or, get in this sort of situation or mindset that, I have to think like, a white man, or I have to shape my ideas that would satisfy, a white person. He really sort of uncovered that shell, and then, transitioning from there to Juliet, seeing again Denise as a Black woman that is a co-founder of an ad agency, that shoots your confidence up to the roof to, be more unapologetic, be more accepting of your mistakes, because again, it's, as she said, it's just her mere presence or existence that is enough to, keep me going.
Yeah. And would you say working in spaces and agencies where you don't feel like you are tokenized or as singled out, or, you feel like you are being taken care of in a way that like is meaningful to you, and, you're working in diverse spaces, does this affect the work that you do in terms of the content you produce, in terms of the designs that you produce? Do you feel like if you were in other spaces, the work that you produce might just look different or maybe speak to different people?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can't really speak to what it would be like at a, let's say predominantly white agency, but I do feel like, working with Denise, there wouldn't be any sort of pushback if I wanted to design something that, had more ethnic colors, or had, used a photo or an illustration of, someone that looked like me, as opposed to, often what we might find in some other agencies, um, you know, a bit of pushback because your boss doesn't look like you, they want to make sure that, the work that you're doing reflects their experience and not necessarily what you want to bring to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And where do you see, the outlook of designers, which is like such a broad question, but I mean, do you see more and more designers that do look like you? Is this something that you begin to notice as like a trend forward, or you've always just kind of been in spaces where there are people who, even if they don't look like you, they come from many different walks of life and different backgrounds?
I think for me, I think I've always seen us. I think I'm extremely hopeful that other people can finally see us and start opening the doors for us so that, we can get the same, if not equal or better opportunities to showcase our talents.
Awesome. And Anton, I want to talk to you about, again, your experience as well. And, feel free to talk about what it's been like also going to art school. Did you see yourself in the peers that you're around? Do you currently see yourself in the coworkers and the peers that you work with as well? And just, again, what your experience has been like being Black and being in advertising?
I guess starting in art school, I think it was definitely, OCAD is diverse, I will say that. When I was there, there weren't a lot of Black people, especially not in the advertising program. I may have been the only one, or maybe there was another, like I can't remember. So that's already a bad sign that I can't remember. But even after, I kind of, looking back now, I kind of feel guilty almost when I went into advertising and I started at my first agency where Denise was at the time. I mean, Denise, when you said Denise has touched everyone's lives, like Denise has touched everyone's lives.
Yeah.
Denise it's like that show Touched by an Angel.
I was just thinking that. Denise is like Tess. Denise is like Tess and just touched everyone.
My humility can't handle all of this.
Touched by an Angel. Shout out to that show.
Turn off my screen.
But even when I started there, I think at the time JWT it was pretty diverse. I was kind of happy to see that we had Black people, on the admin side, we had Black people on the creative side. But my mentality still was very much the thing that Damian was just saying, how you kind of start making stuff that reflects what you think other people want to see. And you don't even realize that you're doing it. It's just like, okay, we're going to put, like in casting, for example, we're going to write a script and, oh, why is everyone in this script white suddenly? Like, and these generic kind of stereotypes of this cookie cutter, like this is what a family looks like, because that's what you've grown up your whole life seeing on TV, and that's what you're surrounded by. So I kind of had to break myself out of that slowly. And actually I was called out very early on when I was an intern by a client who was like, why is it just white people in this deck? And I'm like, oh, fuck. Oh, sorry, can I swear? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
I was like, oh, crap. What did I just do? Literally. And I wasn't even thinking it. I'm just, scrolling through and putting images in.
Yeah.
And I feel now being surrounded, kind of going from being at an agency that was so diverse, kind of did bring me out of that slowly. And then eventually you kind of get to a place where, like Denise was saying, just by virtue of existing in this space, you become an activist, where you kind of, in casting, you push for more diverse talent in the way you write. You challenge these stereotypical scripts that you may see from, like the joke is an ad bro who's like, a white guy who's, upper middle class and is in advertising. And great, it's just that there's not enough of people like us. It's like there's nothing wrong with being an ad bro. It's just that it's too much, and advertising has become consumed by this visual of a bunch of white guys sitting in a room talking.
Very Mad Men kind of,
Exactly, very Mad Men, but like, yeah, with a bit less drinking. But that's what advertising was like when I came in. And now I'm glad that this year, as sad as it is, what it took for this to change, I'm glad that something has happened to kind of shift the conversation. Because even before having these conversations about representation in advertising and the structure and the makeup of ad agencies was kind of like, yeah, it sucks, but you know what? What are we gonna do about it? It's like, where's the talent? There's no talent. We can't just go and hire a Black person because there's no Black people. But now people are actually like, there's a fire under everyone's asses, and people are taking more notice.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that has happened, and now we can all kind of benefit from this overall movement, and we can all be part of it in making these agencies more diverse and having more Black people in there.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say there's this whole like, where's all the talent, you know, where's the talent? I think I've often heard like, oh, I would love to hire more Black people, I would love to have like more diverse sets or organizations, but where are they? Which is like so frustrating to hear, because it's like, we're literally here. What do you say to that when people you know, have that question of like, well, where are all the talents? Like, where's the Black designers and where are the Black creative directors? And I would love to diversify, but like, oh, woe is me, it's so hard.
I think there's kind of two layers to that. One layer is you're not looking hard enough. You can look harder, because just the fact of the matter is the Black population of Canada isn't that high. So, but there's a Black person to fill every role. You just need to look harder. But at the same time, you can't say there's no talent and then do nothing to nurture talent. And because like this, for example, this panel for people who are thinking about going into advertising, for Black kids who may not even know this is an option. Mm-hmm. And a lot of agencies and advertising in general just like felt like it ignored that whole aspect of this equation, because it's so cyclical, where it's race intersecting with class, intersecting with all those things. And everyone in advertising most people in advertising are not from, you know, impoverished families or from difficult backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And you find that a lot of Black people are like, just by the nature of systemic racism, come from more poor backgrounds. So it's harder for them to get into this vocation that is almost kind of, you know, considered flimsy. It's like, art, really? You're gonna do that? So, but no one helps people to get into it. But then they sit there and say, oh, but where's the talent? So it's like, you should be nurturing the talent. So we can't if people are talking about making agencies more diverse, they should be doing what we're doing right now, and kind of helping people get a leg up where for so long they haven't been equal and they need a leg up.
Definitely. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That was like a dope response to a question that was like pretty challenging. So I'm glad that you're able to shed some light on that. And Mirabelle, can you talk about what your experience has been like? Obviously, you shared a little bit about like being so, you know, proud and excited to see someone who looks like you, but has this always been the case now that you are no longer in school and you're, you know, working as a copywriter? What has your experience been like? And where do you see like the trajectory of like maybe your career, but also just like the nature of copywriting in general in terms of the content that's being approved, you know, the types of writers who are working in these agencies, and et cetera?
Yeah, sure, of course. And I think what everyone has said is like incredibly true and valuable. And I think I'm going to borrow some nuggets as I go along the way from what everyone has said. But it's still challenging, because even in, you know, the agency that I'm in right now, I'm still one of the few Black people. And I remember having a realization back in June when this whole conversation about diversity started. Unfortunately, because of a tragedy in the Black community. When that conversation started, I only just realized that I was the only female creative in my agency, female Black creative in my agency, which for some reason I didn't realize that for so long. And I think that goes back to what Anton was saying about when you do get into an agency, you kind of start to think in a different way. And you start to think the way that you're expected to think, because you're trying to like assimilate or fit in, whatever that is. And I think that's why I didn't have the realization that I was literally all by myself in terms of like people who look like me. Obviously Anton is there, but like being the only female Black creative and I didn't realize how much that affected me mentally, and how it can make you want to just be in your bubble and not like everyone else. So it's been a journey, especially this year with these conversations. It's getting much better, and I'm seeing a lot of work being done, and that's really incredible to see, and I hope that continues. In terms of the future, I really, really hope that people show up with like, you know, all the conversations that I've been like that we're having now. I hope that in the next few months, there's a whole lot more people that look like us in this industry. because it gets lonely sometimes, you know, like not being able to share jokes about, you know, I don't know, like rice and peas or something. I don't know, like on a Zoom call. I don't know. Like it does get lonely, and just not being able to even get the jokes that other people have.
Yeah.
And for me, I think there's another added layer to it. Just like Anton, I didn't grow up in Canada. Like I moved here not too long ago.
Mhm.
And so there's another layer to that, right? Just being a Black person and then being an immigrant from Nigeria, and literally no one's gonna get my jokes. So so just, you know, that has been like challenging, but I'm really, really positive, and you know, hopefully that these conversations are gonna move us to a better place in the industry. In terms of the trajectory from myself particularly, it does feel like I'm an activist just by existing, and I feel like I do feel a responsibility, and I sometimes it can be a lot of pressure to represent everyone that looks like you to, you know, a bunch of people. But I realize that it's still, at the end of the day, it is a privilege to be able to do that. And so it's just having to accept that this is happening and that I want to do it and I have to keep doing it, to be able to show up for other people like Denise did for me, did for everyone on this call, right? So that's so in terms of my trajectory, I hope to keep growing, and I hope to one day be a creative director, you know, and do all of that. In terms of like the industry, I really hope that we start telling more Black stories. You know, I want to be able to see an ad and my mom would be able to see herself in it, right? And I want, hopefully, because you know, when you talk about Black Canada, I think the Black Canadian population is it's unique compared to other Black populations because of how focused on immigration Canada is. So when you take the Black story and you make it just one thing, that's not okay, right? So hopefully there's, within the Black stories, hopefully there's some diversity, like an intersectionality and authenticity that we can all relate to, right? As we have different experiences, we all have different backgrounds. So that's really my hope, is better stories, more authentic stories that reflect more of Black Canada. So yeah.
I love that. Thank you.
I just wanted to jump in with one point that Mirabelle touched on about like telling Black stories and normalizing being able to see that in our media, because I find it really hilarious how when you like seeing Black people in ads or seeing Black people on TV, it's like it becomes a point that you're seeing a Black person.
Definitely.
The default is white, and which, like, when you think about the default being white, it's kind of insane. It's like, why is this the default? If there's a Black person cast, that means there has to be some ulterior motive, or there has to, it can't just be like, oh, we just cast a Black person because that was the person who showed up. You know what I mean? And like, that's the future I think we should be working towards, where you can cast a Black person and not have to explain or give a backstory to why this person is Black. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely. It's also oh, I feel like I hear someone. Mirabelle.
No, I was gonna add on to what Anton just said. Like, even with that, it's you know, it's like when you do tell Black stories, there's some areas where you can tell Black stories. Like, I worked on a project for it was for, I'm not gonna name the client, but it was for like the VE Day, and we ended up casting a Black character for that, and that's not an area where you hear a lot of Black story, or you see people who are Black being portrayed, because that's more of like a, you know, when you talk of like Remembrance Day or like veterans, like that's more of a white thing, it's not a Black thing, right? But we were part of that too, right? Like people, right? So I think stories, and then like making sure that in all these areas that are not not typical to see Black characters, I think it's important to start infusing our stories into those areas, because we were part of those things, right?
I have so many more questions for you folks that I wish I could just like keep you here and monopolize all of your time. And I'm sure folks watching at home have questions. It's not a live event, but you know, questions can certainly go down in, you know, the question and comments area, and we'll definitely try and, you know, get back to folks as we can. Like I said, I would love to talk for hours with you folks. Maybe next time we'll schedule this earlier.